Okay, Andrew Bascombe, thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here, Adam.
Uh, First, I mean, there may be some awareness of who you are because you have run in an election once before, not in the Guelph area. So, for those purposes, I'm just going to ask you to take a minute and introduce yourself to the listeners. Who is Andrew Bascombe?
Andrew Bascombe is your typical neighbor. Hardworking, tax-paying, Canadian citizen, husband, father, good neighbor, hopefully. You'd have to actually ask my neighbors for confirmation on that. I have run before for election back in 2019 when I first moved into Acton. Because the party was in a situation where they did not have a candidate. So I reached out to the EDA. We had a conversation. They made it clear to me that if I wanted to be, I could be the candidate. So, my life has always been one of if there's a need that I could fill, I always step into that role and do the best I can with the knowledge and the input I can bring to the table to see what differences I can make. So, in a nutshell, that is who I am and who you get when you get around to knowing who I am.
Okay, we have established you've run before.
Yes.
You want to run again, or you are running again, I guess.
Yes.
What made you want to get back into it in 2025?
Well, the 2019 run was more or less a warm up and just to kind of get my feet wet and understand the process. The 2025 run is to say that after 20 years of an incumbent in our riding, the question becomes whether or not we, as the people in the riding, are benefiting from that incumbency or if it's just the party placeholder that we have in place. I understand it is a very conservative riding, but with the changes of the boundaries, I think it also bemodes us to have change in our representation as well.
I was going to ask you about that, but I'm going to ask you about Michael Chong first,
Sure.
because you referenced him.
Mhm.
He has, as you had said, he's been MP for t almost 20 years.
Yes.
Pretty well liked. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who aren't conservative voters who think well of Michael Chong. They see him as kind of a contrarian because he once like left cabinet on a matter of conscience. So is what's for you, I guess, as trying to unseat an incumbent, what are some of the things you're trying to make the point on? Because it's hard enough running against an incumbent if he is that placeholder, but I'm not entirely, speaking as a political observer, I'm not entirely convinced people in Wellington-Halton Hills North necessarily see Michael Chong as a placeholder. I think they see him as someone who can be a party man, but also be an iconoclast as well.
I won't disagree with that entirely. I understand that the byline on him is that he's a decent individual, and I have no doubts about that. I've met him on a number of occasions and had the opportunity to, discuss with him and debate against him. So there's that. My thing in regards to just our political class in general is the idea of legacy
Mm,
for representation, the idea that creates apathy amongst the voters because you go with the name, you don't necessarily go with the record.
right.
And we're aware that what he did in his first term, stepping against the party to establish his position in regards to Quebec and its favored nation status, is one thing. But the question becomes, what have you done for us lately?
Mm,
Yeah, the byline is exactly that. Michael Chung is an upstanding individual, and there's nothing you can do to take that away from him. But at the end of the day, the boundaries have changed. Life in 2025 is very different than life in 2015
mm,
or even 2012, or you go back to the mid 80s, the mid 90s, and the issues we faced with our economy during those specific periods, which a lot of people tend to reference, is very similar to what we're facing now, with the exception of the crazy man that's down south being the push behind it. So for me, it's not just a simple matter of taking on an incumbent. It's an idea of taking on the need for change. And I understand that people in general are afraid of change, and we tend to get comfortable with what we know. So that to me is more of a bigger challenge. than
Hmm.
anything else. Not just the this party establishment, but the mentality that, hey, it's Michael. So yeah, Michael can do no wrong. And yeah, I'm comfortable with Michael. I don't really know this other guy or this other gal or whoever else is running for whatever else party. Um, but I still come back to the same point I made before. Are we as a riding, have we benefited from the conservative being there, or has the conservative benefited from being there?
I mean, that's an interesting point, and I think in so much as maybe this was starting out to be a change election, maybe it's not a change election, but it is a change election for the people in Guelph South End, and it's certainly a change election for the other members of Wellington-Halton Hills North who either find themselves still in that riding or sectioned off and to be part of Milton now if you live in Georgetown. But in terms of
Exactly.
you've referenced this, how does having Guelph part of this riding sort of change the game? Um, in so much as you want to call this a game, how has that changed your calculus in campaigning? I guess advantages are you thinking that maybe you have running as in Wellington Halton Hills North as opposed to Wellington Halton Hills?
Well, I think in certain instances, it's kind of the same question that I was asked in a previous interview where they wanted us to address the issue of the ruralness of our writing and the city side of our writing.
Hmm.
And I don't like the divide that we generate sometimes with labels that we place on people and places. I think we need to address the basic needs of our constituency. Whether you're farming or whether you're working in a factory, whether you're a scientist or a student, you have basic needs. And the question becomes, how is your representation addressing those basic needs? Are you able to put food on the table? Are you able to pay your rent? Are you able to pay your mortgage? Do you have to every month figure out where you're going to get funds to pay this bill or the other? So whether you are rural or in the center of the city, those things don't change for you, right? The annexation or the joining of the section of Guelph into Wellington, Halton Hills North, it's like your neighbor is next door to you, and you know he's there, but you don't necessarily disturb him or get into his business. And then all of a sudden, he's knocking on your door asking for your help. So that would be the way I would address the change in the riding. Your neighbor is now part of your everyday life, and you want to make sure that you're doing things that are positive for him and he's doing things that are positive for you.
So, I mean, I kind of addressed this with one of your colleagues in this race that, you have so many different municipalities that are part of this one riding. You have, part of Halton Hills, which is part of Halton Region. You have
Yep.
all the municipalities in Wellington County, plus the Wellington County apparatus, plus the city of Guelph. It sounds like you're making the case that this isn't a kind, to borrow a phrase, kind of like a schizophrenic writing. That there's a lot in common in this writing that perhaps more so than people might dig into on the surface.
Certainly. And at the same time, I will always go back to the root, right? There are always going to be differences in every aspect of how we deal with things, but I think the overall cost of living, the quality of life that we get for the taxes that we pay are more of a pressing matter as to whether or not I'm in one industry or another. We
Hmm.
need to first and foremost address the basics of life.
Hmm. Could you dig a little bit into that in terms of what the basic, like from your point of view, and in terms of what you want a federal government to be responsive to when you're talking about the basics of life? What does that look like for one of your constituents?
Well, if we look at housing, which is the biggest concern across the board, whether you're here in Wellington, Halton Hills, or you're in BC, anywhere within our great country, the government, in its attempt to squash the rising prices between 2015 and 2021, putting a certain amount of rules to say you need to be able to do this, that, and the other in order to qualify for a mortgage in the first place.
Hmm.
And that did very little to help stem the tide of the rising prices. And in my opinion, what it did was lock out more individuals from the market than it brought into. You now have individuals who are paying $2,500, $3,500 in rent who can't qualify for a mortgage,
Hmm.
right? And that's not simply because they're not able to save enough money to qualify. It's because the parameters as to them being able to qualify and then hit that standard of if the rate goes up, will you be able to still make your payment, right? And
Hmm.
we know for facts that at the end of the day, Canadians will do everything in their power, first and foremost, to make sure that they have that roof over their heads. They will make whatever sacrifices once they're able to get into the market to remain in the market. Very few people are seeking homes for the purposes of growing their wealth. They want to make sure that they have a safe environment in which to grow their family first and foremost. The income that may come from the housing going up in appreciation is a secondary thing for most of them, not for all. Let's be honest about that. There are those that are investing specifically for that purpose. But again, the basic, everyday run of the mill Canadian wants to make sure they have a roof over the head for themselves and for their families. So
Absolutely.
that's the thing that I think the government the government should have stayed out of it
Hmm.
is my thing. And if they truly want to address the affordability, and what I'm about to say will perhaps make people think I'm out of my mind, change the way we put the interest rates towards mortgages. You
Hmm.
have a set interest rate for your credit card, you have a set interest rate for your personal loans, you have a set interest rate for your car payment. None of those fluctuate when the Bank of Canada rate goes up. But your biggest purchase, your most important purchase, is at play in the free market, right? And
Hmm.
I can't see why we cannot. And I know people are saying it's not their role. They have no say as to what the Bank of Canada does or doesn't do. Maybe it's time they do have a say, right? Set a set rate for mortgages. Give me an actual 30-year amortization. Other countries do it. Other countries do it for a longer period of time. We need to give our citizens that safety net of knowing that after they've worked their butts off at their jobs, after they've paid up to 50% of their income to taxes, they have a home to call their own that they
Am,
can afford.
am I crazy, or are you, as an NDP candidate, calling for market-based solutions?
I'll go even further than that. I'll call for common sense solutions like the
Okay.
conservatives like to throw out at us, right? And I'll go even further to say if you've looked at the policies the parties have all of a sudden starting to throw out because we're in an election, and I'll tie it back to the idea of legacy incumbency. Where were our candidates in the last 20 years putting forth these ideas, whether it's tearing down interprovincial barriers, making sure your qualifications in one province are equal to your qualifications in another? Where were they throughout
Right.
this period of time? Because in my view, you do not have to be the ruling party to bring forth policies that benefit your citizens, right? We're in a
Hmm.
minority government. We've been in a minority government for the last 6 years. What policies has Michael Chong put forth as our representative that have benefited us? His party has played the game of we need to call an election, we need to call an election, only for the purpose of them wanting to get into power. In the last three elections, Canadians made it clear to them they didn't want them in power,
Right.
right? So, you know, that's where I stand on that. But yeah, if you want to call it market solutions to a situation, I can accept that. And at the same time, I'm flexible in my thinking as to how we approach life because I don't feel that one individual or one party has the answers to all our solutions,
Right.
right? Or all our situations, especially in a minority government. You are supposed to collaborate. You are supposed to work to the benefit of your citizenry, not the party. Any politician that puts the party first is not representing his constituents, because there are people in your constituents that didn't vote for you who still need your help.
Hmm. Would you argue that maybe that's a selling point of the NDP? I know that your leader, Jagmeet Singh, has gotten a lot of, let's call it flack for holding up the Liberal Party through some of its most unpopular times, but you're saying that's a selling point that the NDP put points on the board even not being in power.
I'm saying if our citizens understand how our democracy works, then yeah, exactly. Right? There, we tend to live in a bubble in North America,
Mm,
thinking we're the biggest and best and the brightest in every aspect of life, and the reality is we're not. We are lacking in a very broad areas, and we should seek how other countries do certain things and import those ideas into our life. Um, what Jagmeet has done is what I would hope any party in his position trying to make the lives of Canadians better would do. Because at the end of the day, it is not about the party, it is about the people.
hmm
Okay. Now,
hmm
people don't like him for whatever reason. People want to always say he's no Jack Layton. Well, before Jack Layton was there, I'm pretty sure they didn't say he, people probably said he was no Ed Broadbent,
Yeah,
right?
fair enough.
People probably said he was no Alexa McDonough. But throughout the 50 years that I've been living in this country, um, we've had conservative and liberal governments as the ruling parties. And right beside them, we've had the NDP pushing for gains for people, gains that these parties at times would vote against. But in order for them to stay in power, all of a sudden, yes. It's like your manager that you go to and you propose a little change to benefit your coworkers, but because the change and the idea didn't come from him, he doesn't want to hear about it,
Right.
right? But as soon as he's able to maybe go to his boss and say, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I think we should do this, all of a sudden it's the best idea since sliced bread.
I would point out that one of Mark Carney's last acts before calling the election was expanding dental care,
Of course, of course, right?
which
And
wasn't
they,
on the liberal platform.
woo-hoo,
Yeah.
and they want to take credit for everything and anything that the NDP brings forth, and then talk and pretend like the NDP isn't even there. And the
Mm,
media, the media is responsible for a lot of that as well, right? We have a situation where, um, for provincially, something was brought up, and they go to Bonnie Crombie for her input. And with no disrespect to her, she doesn't even have a seat in the House,
mm,
right?
hmm
We have a leader of the opposition in Merritt Stiles. Why are you not reaching out to her, right? The bias in the media is something that needs to be addressed. I took journalism when I was at Humber College, right? From what I can remember being taught, you're supposed to who, what, when, where, who, what, when, where, why, and how. That is the crux of what journalism is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be about opinion. It's not supposed to be about hearsay. It's about facts, and it's about what happened, why it happened, where it happened, how it happened, etc. That is it. That is what reporting is supposed to be about. These days, it's speculation, it's innuendo, it's clickbait, it's who can get the 5 seconds bite, and we move on. 24-hour cycle of media is killing our democracy.
Well, I hope you'll forgive me if I invest a couple of minutes into prognostication because I kind of
Mhm.
want to get a sense of Jagmeet Singh. We've seen him as an opposition leader. Um, from your point of view, what are the qualities that would make him good prime minister material?
His ability to work with the other parties, for one. His ability to see an issue not just from the lens of the NDP wants this, the NDP wants that. His understanding of the common man. The fact that he hasn't been a politician for the last 30 years, right? To me, I think he's still fresh in the sense of understanding what the everyday Canadian is experiencing, right? As opposed to Pierre, who's been there for 20 years. And we need to believe that the man that said that, what the indigenous people of this country need are jobs. And then he voted against unions, and he's voted against farmer care. He's voted against dental care. He's voted against anything and everything that would benefit the average Canadian. But he wants you to believe that now, after 3 years of, you know, 3-word slogans, after Canada's broken, now he's the one who's going to champion us and make us better, make us stronger, make us free again.
Mm.
We've been free. We've been free to disagree. We've been free to, grow. We've been free to do things the way Canadians have always done things. But now all of a sudden he feels it's his way or no way at all. Jagmeet has been consistent in his approach to making sure that the citizens come first, whether it's workers who are on strike, who he stands against the government legislating them back to work because he believes in true bargaining, whether it's people that are finding it difficult to afford groceries, attacking the gouging that has happened. It's been proven. And whether it's basically citizens and more specifically, corporations paying their fair share of our tax burden. So that's why I feel he will make a fantastic prime minister. And if I can add anything to that as well,
Mm-hmm.
it's a collaborative initiative when it comes to the NDP. He listens to what the other members of the party have to say in regards to what needs to be done. I don't believe that to be the case for the other parties because there are times when I feel that we put too much focus on who the leader of the party is. We're in a democracy. We have 338 representatives in our parliament. Why can't one of them stand up to a party leader and say, this is not why I was elected? All right. Now, we do have examples where, in the case of the Liberals, whenever a woman stands up, we know what happens in that case, right? I can guarantee you that for the NDP, if it was a woman or anyone else standing up to a situation that she didn't agree that Jagmeet was voicing, she would still have a job at the end of the day.
I would argue that maybe it was a woman who ultimately brought down Justin Trudeau,
Of course.
at least inflicted a mortal wound. I like to ask all the candidates every election this question, which is, apart from party policy, apart from maybe something we've addressed already, is there an issue in particular that you want to make sure that you talk about in this election? What is kind of your issue that you hope by April 28th you've got to really dig in and talk about, whether that's on the campaign trail, at a debate, in this forum? What's your issue?
Hmm. I've never really thought about it as to say just my issue alone. Um, I think overall, the general public needs to become more invested in politics. And I'll give it to you from the perspective of my parents.
Hmm.
Growing up, politics was never talked about. It's not something you discuss at the dinner table. That was the attitude. And then on top of that, you add the idea that, well, you're never going to change. You're never going to make a change. And
Mm.
I guess it was maybe in my mid 20s where I just butted my head up against that mentality of that's just the way things are, and that's just the way we do it. So let's continue to do it that way. And in any job I've ever held, I've always, when that type of mentality presents itself and I've been able to see the need for a change, I've always been able to find a way to bring forth that change, whether it's just myself saying, let's do this, that, or the other, or working with a team of my coworkers to say, let's at least try it and see if it works. And then, of course, if it works, why not implement it? So there's that. But I think overall, I would like for the citizenry to be more educated, more invested in our politics, because it affects your life in so many ways that because you're so busy trying to make sure that you have the basics taken care of, you don't have time to see the ways in which the politician that you sent to parliament is making decisions that are negatively impacting you until
Mm.
it's too late,
Mm.
right? So an education, a more robust involvement in what your representative is saying on your behalf. And I would like to stress that as well. I've held roles as leaders in my workforce. I've been the union chair for my division, and I've always said that I speak on behalf of my members. I don't speak for my members.
Mm.
Certainly, I have a voice as well. I'll have an opinion. Sometimes my opinion will be totally against what my membership is telling me. But in my role as your representative, I have to bring forth what you are telling me to my management team and then bring back what the management team is telling me to my members. I'm just the voice, I'm just the middleman. I am not the lawmaker, I am not the end all and be all of how we function. And I think too many politicians lose sight of that, right? You're a spokesman for those who voted for you as well as those who didn't. You need to be able to find a balance so that everybody benefits from the actions you take, or even worse, from the actions you fail to take,
Hmm.
right? There has to be that balance. And so that, if anything, is what I would want to put forth.
That is a very interesting answer, and my listeners will know why. But I'm afraid we have to wrap up. So, Andrew, for my final question, and it is the most important, where can people learn more about you and your campaign?
Well, there's Andrew Bascombe .ndp.ca, of course, and then my Twitter is John at Andrew NDP 2025.
All right. That's perfect. I want to thank you for your time today, Andrew, and I want to say good luck through the rest of this campaign. And we look forward to seeing what happens, and we look forward to seeing you around Guelph as well. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will too. So thank you for your
And they
time today.
definitely will. Thank you. Appreciate it, Alan. Have a good day.